Andrew Myers, a quiet elderly man with a calm and unassuming demeanor, stepped into a bustling car dealership on a chilly afternoon. His old sedan, though reliable, was nearly a decade old, and he decided it was time for an upgrade. Clad in a worn-out coat and scuffed shoes, Andrew looked entirely out of place amidst the sleek interiors and well-dressed clientele. But he wasn't there to impress anyone. He was simply looking for a car that met his needs. As Andrew wandered through the dealership, admiring the gleaming vehicles on display, the reaction from the staff was far from welcoming. Despite his evident interest, no one approached him to offer assistance. Instead, the salespeople busied themselves with younger, flashier customers who looked like they could afford the dealership's luxury models. Andrew's modest appearance seemed to render him invisible in the eyes of the staff. One of the salesmen, Garrett Blake, a young man with slicked-back hair and a self-assured smirk, briefly made eye contact with Andrew, but quickly turned his attention to a well-dressed couple who had entered moments later. The whispers among the staff, the dismissive glances, and the palpable indifference were impossible to ignore. Andrew waited patiently by a shiny black sedan that had caught his eye, running his hand along its polished surface and imagining himself behind the wheel. After nearly 20 minutes of being ignored, he decided to take matters into his own hands. He approached the main desk, where 3 salesmen stood chatting animatedly. "Excuse me," he said politely, his voice steady despite the growing frustration in his chest. "I'm interested in purchasing one of your vehicles. Could someone assist me?" Garrett barely glanced up from his phone. "We're a bit busy at the moment," he replied dismissively. "Why don't you come back later?" Andrew's expression remained calm, but inside a storm was brewing. He nodded curtly and turned to leave, his heart heavy with disappointment and anger. As he walked out, he heard one of the salesmen mutter under his breath, followed by a faint chuckle. "Wasting time on window shoppers," the voice sneered. Little did they know, Andrew Myers was far from an ordinary man. He had spent decades building a fortune through smart investments and business acumen, yet he chose to live simply, valuing character over material possessions. The humiliation he felt that day would not be easily forgotten. As he drove away in his old car, a plan began to take shape in his mind. That evening, Andrew made a few phone calls to his influential contacts in the business world. By the next morning, he had orchestrated a move that would not only change his life, but also turn the dealership upside down. The following morning, Andrew Myers arrived at the dealership once more. This time, he wasn't there as a customer. After a series of strategic negotiations the night before, Andrew had secured the necessary funds and agreements to acquire the entire car dealership. As he stepped through the glass doors, the same staff who had ignored him the day before were present, completely unaware of the seismic shift that had occurred overnight. Andrew was dressed the same. His modest coat and worn shoes didn't hint at the magnitude of the change. He walked in with quiet confidence, but this time there was a spark of determination in his eyes. The dealership's general manager, Thomas Green, noticed Andrew immediately. Unaware of who he was or why he had returned, Thomas put on a forced smile and approached him. "Good morning, sir," Thomas said, his tone polite but insincere. "How can we assist you today?" Andrew reached into his coat pocket and retrieved a neatly folded set of documents. Without a word, he handed them to Thomas and watched his reaction closely. Thomas's brows furrowed as he unfolded the papers and began to read. His face gradually turned pale, his confident smile fading into an expression of disbelief and panic. "What is this?" Thomas stammered, his voice unsteady. Andrew finally broke his silence. "I'm not here to buy a car," he said calmly, his gaze unwavering. "I'm here as your new boss." The room fell silent as the weight of Andrew's words sank in. The once dismissive staff began to notice the interaction, their curiosity piqued. Whispered conversations broke out among them as they tried to piece together what was happening. Thomas, still holding the papers with trembling hands, looked up at Andrew with wide eyes. This can't be right," he muttered. "You bought the dealership?" "That's correct," Andrew replied, his tone firm but composed. "As of this morning, I own this operation, and I'm here to make some changes." The staff exchanged nervous glances. Those who had laughed at Andrew the previous day now looked visibly uncomfortable. Garrett Blake, the slick-haired salesman who had dismissed Andrew so callously, shifted uneasily in his spot, his smirk replaced with a look of dread. Andrew turned to address the entire room, his voice carrying quiet authority. Yesterday, I came here as a customer. I was looking to buy a car, but instead of being treated with respect, I was ignored, dismissed, and judged based solely on my appearance. You assumed I wasn't worth your time. You made a mistake. The tension in the room was palpable. No one dared to interrupt as Andrew continued. As of today, things are going to change. This dealership will no longer tolerate arrogance or discrimination of any kind. Every customer who walks through these doors will be treated with respect, regardless of how they look or what you think they can afford. He turned back to Thomas. And that starts with leadership. Thomas, you're fired. Thomas's jaw dropped. Fired, he echoed incredulously. You can't be serious. I'm very serious, Andrew replied. Your leadership has fostered a toxic culture here, and that ends now. One by one, Andrew began addressing the other staff members, calling out those who had displayed the same dismissive behavior he had experienced. Garrett was among the first names on the list. Garrett Blake, Andrew said, locking eyes with the young salesman. Garrett froze, unable to meet Andrew's gaze. You showed me exactly the kind of attitude this dealership will no longer tolerate. Pack your things. Garrett opened his mouth to protest, but knew it was futile. With his head down, he walked toward the back office to gather his belongings. Andrew wasn't firing people for revenge. He was building a team that reflected his values: respect, humility, and kindness. Among the staff, one person stood out, a young woman named Laura Bennett. Unlike her colleagues, Laura had discreetly greeted Andrew the previous day and offered a warm smile. Though she wasn't assigned to sales, Andrew had noticed her kindness. Laura Bennett, Andrew called out. She stepped forward nervously. Starting today, you'll be the new floor manager. I trust you'll lead with fairness and respect. Laura's eyes widened. Me? But I've only been here 6 months. I'm not interested in seniority, Andrew replied. I'm interested in people who treat others the right way. Congratulations. Under Laura's leadership and Andrew's guidance, the dealership flourished. Word spread quickly about the dramatic changes, and customers began to notice the difference. Within weeks, sales soared, and the dealership's reputation skyrocketed. Andrew, however, remained as modest as ever. One afternoon, as he walked through the showroom, Laura approached him. Mr. Myers, I just wanted to thank you for believing in me. Andrew smiled. You earned it, Laura. Just remember, treat people with respect. That's what truly matters. And with that, Andrew Myers had not only transformed a dealership, but left an indelible mark on everyone who walked through its doors.